financial services is transformed. What fundamentally has changed is that the cost of innovation has gone down dramatically. Firms have been able to look at technology as part of, instead of a large capital expenditure, as something operational expense they can build into their business. When I think about something like buy now, pay later, that's all driven by large scale machine learning analytics in the background.
Financial services is a factor of trust, risk, and regulation. Mm-hmm. Are there any specific use cases or specific business groups where you see it's a big challenge to apply these kind of emerging technologies like Gen AI, and it's going to take many more years?
One is the challenge of moving these early applications into production at scale. That's a real platform challenge, right? And the second one is from a use case perspective. Generative AI is really good at things that have been done before, right? So if you don't have a strong enterprise data architecture to bring to these generative AI applications, they don't tend to work well. But the technology is changing so quickly. I do feel for the CTOs at our customers when they think about, okay, what's the point in time that I want to invest and say, this is the stack that I want to build on, because the stack is changing so quickly.
But do you think so the human emotions can be replaced by AI?
I think the human judgment becomes even more valuable. And I actually think that judgment becomes more important, and the tools enabling the person to make those decisions become more powerful. Well, the question is, how are you going to trust those portals to make those decisions for you? I think that's actually going to be the real challenge about consumer adoption in the future.
Welcome to Zinnov Podcast, where we bring you conversations with eminent industry stalwarts and thought leaders from across the globe as they share insights on shaping the future of enterprise growth, AI, innovation, transformation, and more.
Welcome to another episode of Zinnov Podcast. I'm Rajat Kohli, partner at Zinnov. Zinnov is a boutique strategy consulting firm working largely with the hyperscalers as well as the large and the mid-sized ISVs to define their business acceleration and the partnership strategy. And I'm excited about the conversation today with John Kain. He's a worldwide head of the business development for the financial services working with Amazon Web Services. In his role, he takes care of the strategy and the go-to-market to bring more business from the financial services globally. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, excited about this conversation. And it's a regulated industry, the financial services. And I would say that it was one of the early adopters of the technology, not only the legacy, but the advanced technology like the Gen AI or the blockchain or the cloud. How do you see the trends shaping up in the last 1 or 2 decades? How would you put it in your thoughts?
So much of financial services is transformed over the last few decades, right? And if you think back in periods of time, so much of the process was still in person, in paper, kind of driven by legacy processes. I think you could look back, particularly over the last decade of a house, and particularly from my experience from leveraging kind of AWS from a business innovation perspective, what fundamentally has changed is that the cost of innovation has gone down dramatically. Uh-huh. Well, the access to technology has really been more democratized across firms. And so we've seen this continuous movement to a more digital experience across all segments of financial services, whether that's banking, insurance, capital markets, payments, where there's such a tremendous amount of innovation going on today, where firms have been able to look at technology as part of, instead of a large capital expenditure, as something operational expense they can build into their business. And what that allows them to do is experiment with new business models to change the way we offer services. And I think particularly if you look at the fintech space, probably some of the earliest adopters there to actually drive that change. And whether it's somebody like a Robinhood who reimagined what sort of retail investing could be like, and then dramatically changed the price point, right? When I first started the industry, not only was trading expensive from a transaction perspective, the margins and spreads were quite wide, right? And now you have an entrant who had a new vision about how they could serve their customers at a completely different price point, making money within sort of the bid-ask spread. And when you start, you're never really sure you're going to be successful. And the ability to be able to scale up your infrastructure to meet millions of users as you get them as opposed to having to predict what that looks like in a 3-5 year horizon, fundamentally transforms what you can do from a business, both innovation perspective, but also from a global scale. And then particularly with sort of cloud's global footprint, you have that ability to also scale internationally. So you can enter new markets without having to make those investments from both a telecom and infrastructure perspective, but from a personnel perspective. And I think that's just helped the entire industry be a little bit more innovative. And when we see things like real-time payments kind of entering the space, it gives you that ability to kind of be able to adapt quickly for that. Certainly over the last 7 or 8 years, machine learning has been an integral part of being able to reduce cost and friction in the industry. We don't think twice now when we can onboard through our mobile device, like look at our camera and, oh, that's going to take a picture of me. It's going to match an image with the database in the back end. It's going to scan sort of my passport or my driver's license and sort of match that up. That's all sort of machine learning driven technology. And those things have just become sort of default in the way we experience financial services today. And we saw that certainly during the pandemic when we were thinking about sort of all the PPP loans that were going out there and the new KYC and onboarding processes that people had to build. The ability to actually, can I try, a document management service that'll scan my documents, get the critical information, and allow to actually make a lending decision. That was great from a time to market perspective, but also think about like the economics. Those tranches only opened up for short periods of time, and you had infrastructure that could quickly solve the problem, scale up and then back down with the business opportunity, and then do that again when you needed it. It's the same thing we've seen sort of in the mortgage refinancing space, right? The ability to kind of tie advanced technologies, aligning the cost to your business and then kind of moving that forward. And we've only just touched on sort of generative AI and its impacts to the industry. And again, an area where it's really hard to imagine that there are a whole lot of enterprises that are going to want to build their own foundational models or sort of global inference engines. It's just fundamentally a different way to think about technology innovation within the industry. And so it's been very exciting, at least from a cloud perspective, over the last 15 years. And expect the next 15 are going to be equally as exciting.
Interesting. You touch upon the technology innovation. And looking at the financial services, it's one of the largest industry from a tech adoption. And over the last couple of years, we have seen like a lot of surprises happening from this industry from a product innovation. How much credit is given to the technology and the workloads that are being provided to this industry in that innovation cycle?
That's a good question. When I think about something like buy now, pay later, which I think is actually one of those, even though it's not like a new product, the way it's being delivered kind of fundamentally transforms its value. If you're a firm or Klarna, right, that's offering a real-time loan essentially at point of sale embedded within the retail channel, that's all driven by large-scale machine learning analytics in the background. Models on what's my risk with the customer, what have they already transacted with, what are their existing credit scores, and how do I, within a few hundred milliseconds, actually make a decision on whether I want to make that buy now, pay later offering at the retail channel. That's all technology-driven, right? And the ability to actually personalize that lending experience fundamentally is a technology and data challenge more than it is sort of a product challenge. But rethinking the data you have access to and your ability to process it at scale changes the way you can think about how valuable that product is. And then secondly, the ability to embed that into retail channels at a global scale, right? And I think we've seen this more broadly, increasingly sort of banking and banking services being offered as a service to be embedded in other value chains fundamentally changes the way customers experience financial services. So not only are you thinking about how can I innovate from a product perspective, but you're thinking about how do I innovate in the way my customers will actually access them and integrate, as opposed to them having to go externally out. And again, all sort of a data and scale challenge.
Got it. You touch upon the data, and definitely the financial services is a factor of trust, risk, and regulation. And in today's world, especially in 2025, the Gen AI is a world of the creativity and the unpredictability also. Now, if we marry both the financial services with the Gen AI, how the world looks like?
Well, first of all, both regulations and a well-governed infrastructure and process is always sort of the foundation. So innovation comes on top of being compliant, not ahead of being compliant. That being said, generative AI is one of those subjects that, at least in my entire career, I don't think I've seen as much immediate mindshare adoption, both at the C-suite and all the way in the rank and file, about how that technology is going to transform the way they could potentially work. Mm-hmm. And so there's a tremendous amount of excitement and sponsorship from an industry perspective of driving generative AI into the financial services value chain. When you think about sort of how our firms have managed that, I will actually tell you, as an industry, financial services is kind of a step ahead of thinking about how to manage generative AI risk within its own businesses. Okay. We've been very fortunate as an industry that we've had relatively clear regulations on the use of machine learning and analytics technologies within business processes already. So there's a lot to leverage from just sort of a policy and mental mind model about what does a good, well-governed, like a model governance process look like within the industry. And our customers are able to kind of leverage that experience. Similarly, the need to kind of catalog and retain information from a regulatory perspective means that our financial services customers probably have some of the best data architecture and infrastructure from a length of data within the organization. So it really started with a leg up when they thought about this. And the firms that have been most successful take some of the best practices they learned from a cloud adoption perspective and applied it to their generative AI adoption. And so firms already had that in place, and they were able to sort of leverage that best practices moving forward. From a regulatory perspective, it's interesting. Some of the decisions you make within financial services just either have to be made by a human or have to be absolutely explainable from a regulatory perspective. Things like making credit decisions, right, or detecting fraud. But what we're seeing is that customers are really intelligently thinking about what are the best use cases for generative AI within those frameworks, and then sort of using them in the areas where they're comfortable and still working in sort of the more structured processes within that value chain. To come back, though, to your comment about sort of creativity versus compliance, one of our customers was actually early on in their adoption experimenting with generative AI from a customer acquisition perspective. So wanted to do deep personalization from a marketing perspective for some banking products. And they wanted to tap that really interesting ability for generative AI to be creative and actually reaching those customers. So gave them a large number of data points, what they knew about the customer, and said, craft me the most compelling marketing email that you can. And generative AI came up with something that was quite interesting. But then the next step of the process was, tell me this email, what does it violate from corporate best practices and corporate messaging perspective? And tell me why you have concerns about it. And it would actually analyze using a knowledge base of the company's own best practices, like where they were uncomfortable. And then the next step of the process was, well, taking that first email and the output of the second analysis, generate me something that we think is more appropriate for the customer. And that's the one that was actually reviewed by their by their marketing department before being sent out. And that actually had like a 4 times higher click-through rate. That ability to start thinking about like what are the guardrails that I need to put around a process to make it either very accurate, like unlikely to hallucinate, or to put in those guardrails just to make sure it's confirming and aligning to my best practices as an organization before asking you to spend time on it. It's like one of the approaches that we've seen successful in building sort of the next generation of generative AI applications. Instead of going into a console and asking a large language model, onboard my customer, right? It doesn't work very well.
It is.
But by breaking that down into smaller steps, right? Do my sanctions check, do my OFAC screening, do my KYC. By having smaller processes that are anchored with knowledge bases that are very specific to that use case, and that gives you the ability to actually do much better defined guardrails around the process. We're seeing people reinvent the way they're actually offering financial services from a value chain perspective in a way where hallucination rates are much lower. There's more observability, and the output to help make that human decision just gets accelerated and is more accurate.
Interesting. You touch upon the customer experience, the personalization. Are there any other areas outside of the customer experience where you see the applicability of this emerging technology would be widespread and the impact would be much, much larger? Any thoughts around that?
Oh, sure. Many financial services processes, whether we like to admit them or not, are still somewhat heavily human, heavily process oriented. And those are some of the areas that we've seen some of the biggest fundamental changes. So anti-money laundering is a great example. We really haven't seen firms be comfortable from a regulatory perspective of using either deep learning or generative AI to generate anti-money laundering alerts or fraud alerts. They really want that part of the process to be very well explained. But if you're an investigator investigating whether that alert is a real area of concern or maybe a false positive, the ability to actually aggregate up the information you would typically use in an anti-money laundering investigation, summarize those results, give some context to the alert. Firms like Verifin have seen an 80 to 90% reduction in the amount of human time it takes to actually analyze those alerts. And if you are familiar with the industry, so much of the alerting is false positive that it's just a tremendous amount of efficiency savings. And they get to actually dedicate their time to where there's like real areas of fraud. We've seen that across the compliance space, though. Even changes in regulations. We have customers that will scan changes in regulations, actually analyze what's changed in the regulation, compare it to their own policy documents internally, and then say, oh, actually, this new regulation, we either think we do or don't have a procedure to govern it. And if we don't, maybe this would work, maybe not. And well, that doesn't seem like a huge thing. It takes a process that would have taken someone usually a week to get to and figure out and get the research. Something that within an hour, someone's got a pretty good summary and some tangible like anchors from a document and policy perspective to accelerate those. So all of that's going on. You're seeing the same thing, and maybe this is a touch customer experience, but like the mortgage origination, mortgage processing side, the claims side and insurance, first notice of loss, any of these workflows that are actually naturally much smaller sets of steps that kind of work in tandem with each other, that tend to be very document and data driven, are ones that really have been ripe for acceleration from a generative AI perspective. And we've got multiple customers have seen the benefits in kind of both those channels, both from like increased conversion rates, 3x conversion rates on mortgage origination by taking all that friction out of the process of actually having to apply for a mortgage.
Got it.
Yeah. So I think those are just a few of them. And then there's a whole technology transformation that's going on, not just from like a software development perspective, where if you looked at customers like Fitch or DTCC, they're claiming like 20 to 40% acceleration in sort of their own development processes. But I think now you're also seeing the technologies bridge to the product development process, where you can actually enter in sort of prompts from my business process perspective and actually see that get to a first pass at like technical requirements. And it's actually bringing together sort of the product folks and the technology folks within the organization in a much more collaborative approach, which is not just accelerating sort of the technical development, but actually the product definition. And I think that's some of the areas that I know our technology customers, the technology groups within our customers are so excited about, because it gives them a new way to serve their business more effectively and more efficiently, while still sort of maintaining that governance that is required in financial services, from business requirements to what are the actual design elements, who signed off on it, who tested it, who built the test cases. All of that becomes much more streamlined. And candidly, it's work that most people don't particularly enjoy. And so the ability to kind of automate that accelerates the product development process, but also makes the employee experience considerably better. And if we went through and thought through it, there's just so many areas that we're actually seeing generative AI make big differences. Investment research is probably one where I should call out. I think, first of all, the investment firms, they're taking the investment approach they had traditionally, automating some of it from a data collection perspective, as you can imagine. But that gives them the ability to kind of scale those things globally, right? There's really no barrier to thinking about, hey, do I trade instruments in other markets? How do I research other companies? I don't have to worry about language translation as much, right? I don't have to worry about the global scale of collecting things up. I can back test across multiple markets and deploy my strategies. And that's fundamentally also changing the way like data providers are offering products to the industry. If you look at like S&P or Moody's or FactSet, taking a very generative AI forward approach and making their data accessible to other models like through tools, right? So big change in sort of the agentic development through MCP servers to make those tools available to large language. So you get access to real-time information as opposed to when the model was trained. Each of those is making their kind of data sets and analytics exposed to that. And so it's a very exciting way to see a new way of developing applications for financial services as well. Yeah.
But John, if you look at from the other side of the coin, I'm sure there are very limitations on the applicability of the technology. You touched upon the compliance aspect. Are there any specific use cases or specific business groups where you see it's a big challenge to apply these kind of emerging technologies like Gen AI, and it's going to take many more years?
I don't think it's many more years. So I think of it as two challenges. One is the challenge of moving these early applications into production at scale. I mentioned a little earlier that we've seen sort of the move from application development from very kind of broad, hopefully a large language model will solve a very complex process. And even with the improvements in reasoning, there's limits to how that's done. And so we see the agentic approaches where like, many of the agents in the industry, they should be good to like 3 to 5 particular topics. And then if beyond that, you should probably develop another agent. But thinking about now I've got all these agents participating in a workflow, thinking about how do I manage that at scale? Like how do I deploy them safely? How do I make sure information isn't leaking between agents? How do I make sure I have observability into how decision-making is actually being done? And then how do I think about distributing that at a global scale to customers that could be accessing them from anywhere in the world? One of the big beliefs that we have in just the approach to generative AI is we're still very early from a technology perspective. If you look at just what's occurring from a model capability perspective, every year it's a major leap in what those capabilities are. And the ones who have the best capabilities are actually leaping ahead of each other, right? And so you want to be open from a platform perspective to make sure you're giving your customers choice of models. Equally, the agentic area is evolving so quickly, right? And so you also want to give customers the choice of which agentic frameworks to use, right? Whether that's open source or other, so they can pick the ones that work best for them. And people want access to all the models, and having an open enough framework that allows you to kind of take some of those best practices from an agent security guardrails perspective and apply that wherever your customers need them. I think that's kind of critical for us. And the second one is from a use case perspective. Generative AI is really good at things that have been done before, right? Where it's got something to train on and there's a history, and also where you as an organization have a strong knowledge base, right? Data really does end up being the key to enabling these workloads. So if you don't have a strong enterprise data architecture to bring to these generative AI applications, they don't tend to work well. So the more unique the business case is, the less something's been done before, it's less likely that generative AI is going to solve the problem.
Got it.
And happily with ideation and thinking about how you might approach it. But the idea that you'll automate something that hasn't been done before, that's pretty low likelihood.
What are the key points that are discussed in the boardroom of your customers? What are their key priorities, or what are they trying to solve?
Very much the approach to generative AI now is like, what is the impact it's going to make on my business? And while I think people are equally excited about sort of the automation opportunities, it's really where are the opportunities to think about generative AI from a net new revenue generation potential. One of the areas like S&P had gone into, very long history of creating sort of like credit ratings for public companies, where you could actually look at their earnings reports as well as public information and sort of like determine their credit rating. Well, there's a huge exploding kind of private credit market, right? With a large number of companies that aren't public, right? One of the use cases that they thought about from like a business expansion perspective is how do I look at the broad set of public data that's out there and can collect public data that would actually allow me to do sort of credit in a more effective way, right? And so I think there's also an equal pressure now from a board perspective to not just think about it as an efficiency play, but to think about how do I use it to expand into new businesses and sort of drive innovation within the organization. But a little bit, because it is financial services, it all still has to kind of meet the regulatory security and compliance needs. So there's always that balancing from how fast you can execute.
Interesting. I think so. The audience would be keen to learn because over the last couple of months, everyone is talking about the POC to production.
Yes.
How much is the success rate? And it's not only in the regulated, but in the non-regulated industries also. We see it's at a very lower rate. Like, what are the reasons behind that, and what should be the playbook going forward for the hyperscaler world or for the partnership world that the success rate should be much higher? What is the playbook?
So I think there's two things to think about. And I actually think the success rates are higher than people are kind of publishing. I've seen the research, and at least our experiences, it's a bit better. That being said, and I think this is some of the things that we actually saw in early stages of cloud adoption too. You don't want to have experiments for the sake of experimenting, right? It's very easy from a technology perspective to do little proof of concepts to like get your hands on the technology, but don't really matter from a business outcomes perspective. And typically those are the projects that are abandoned because even if they're successful, they don't have real business impact. And some of the things that we talked about, the investments you have to make as a financial services organization to create the platform from a security, compliance, governance process are significant, right? Certainly we help, but there's still the evaluation of the platform, the tools, understanding the controls and the governance. That's a real investment. And if the proof of concept that you're running doesn't really fundamentally change the way the business is operating with it, it's really easy to put them on the side. And I suspect there's a large category of those proof of concepts that don't go to production, not because you couldn't get them to production, but they probably didn't deserve to be in production in the first place. The second is, yes, you do have to do the work from a foundations perspective to get to production, right? And so a lot of the things we've already talked about, I think, are kind of fundamental to being successful at scale. And even if you have a good proof of concept that makes it to production once, you want to make sure that the investments you've made taking that first application to production are ones that you can repeat for multiple applications after that. And I think that's actually where a good part of the industry is right now. It's taking those early successes from their initial productions and essentially figuring out what's the right platform to actually do that at scale. Right? But the technology is changing so quickly. I do feel for the CTOs at our customers when they think about, okay, what's the point in time that I want to invest and say, this is the stack that I want to build on, because the stack is changing so quickly. Even if you see the evolution, like in the investment research space, like 2 years ago, a good example would have been, oh, I have a big corporate data estate. I need to pull a set of data for my investment research report. How do I go do that? And you could ask the question, and it would write the SQL query, and it would bring the data back, and you can download it to your spreadsheet, and away you go. Last year, it would have been like, oh, I have a research assistant where I can ask a research question, and it would kind of actually come back with results that kind of look like a first-year analyst. And now you're seeing processes that are so automated that you can write me a credit memo for this company. It breaks it down into 14 different agentic steps. Those agents work with each other, and you're actually getting some like real efficiency. And that's just in the span of 2 years, right? And so the technology is evolving quickly. So I think our ability to get to production at scale is getting to the point where the tools and the frameworks are becoming common enough.
Interesting. And at Zenov, we are like heavily focused on the partnership and the channel strategy. And I believe that the investments and the focus on the partnership decide the pace of the adoption in the industry. A lot of collaboration needs to be done between the hyperscaler, the system integrators, the data platform providers, as well as the MSPs. So how do you see that partnership playing an important role in this industry? Yeah,
it's critical. As I said, the first and probably foremost is like, what's the business impact of what I'm trying to do? And some of that is technology and technology enabled.
Right.
But a good part of that, whether it's people, process, organization, is enabled by the technology, but it's not fundamentally technology in itself. And so when you're thinking about modernizing a mortgage origination process, right, or you're entering sort of a new business in payments, and you want to figure out how to do real-time and manage fraud and value-added services on top of that, well, some of that's technology enabled. But the business case, what it means for the organization, what their market position is, how to best approach distribution channels in the market, those are to a great degree non-technology solutions. And what we find is working with partners like yourself is that bringing that overall expertise about business and the greater organizational impact, and then understanding how the technology gives you opportunities to actually change the way you look at the business and the economics and the scale, is how the partnerships become really powerful. Because you need to first understand what you're doing from a business perspective before you can appreciate how the technology will impact it. Big investments in financial services to understand how to do that in financial services. But to be truly successful, you have to have that deep relationship with the customer over an extended period of time where you're really focused not just on how they're implementing the technology, but how they're changing their business from both a strategy, but organization, people, and enablement perspective, where we certainly help, but our partners have the ability to do that at a much greater scale than we do.
Got it. And the last question, John, how do you see the next 3 years for this industry? What transformation you would see in this industry?
Oh, I'd hate to actually see this a year from now because it's been hard to imagine the change that's occurred every year. The agentic approach and sort of the broader adoption of agentic, I think, is actually going to do two things to the industry that I'd be excited to keep an eye on. One is the idea of agent marketplaces. As each firm is thinking about streamlining their processes into smaller agents that are good at individual tasks, internally, each organization is always going to have sort of a new framework for building applications. So there's going to be an internal set of agents. And we do that at AWS for our own products, right? There are little agents for everything to answer questions about our services, how to configure them, how to deploy them. But you're going to see that in, I'm going to have a sanctions, right, screening agent. I'm going to have a customer onboarding workflow. And you're going to have both internal organizations get efficiency from an application, but I think increasingly it's going to accelerate the ability to do that with third-party organizations. A little bit about what we're already seeing on the data provider side and being able to embed their vision from a data perspective within a workflow. I think you're going to see the same thing more broadly across the ecosystem. And the ability to interact with an agent is much lighter than an API, right? With the API, you sort of need to know the format. You have to integrate with specific vendors. With an agentic flow, you can use more human language to interact with potential third-party services. And when you think about sort of building the next generation of bank, right, or the next generation of insurer, creating that ecosystem of sort of like a core ledger that's hosting your bank and then finding all the right services around it. Right now, there are great partners that allow you to do that from an API perspective. But I think in the future, it's going to be more agentic focused, and it's going to allow you much more flexibility in choosing your partners from an ecosystem perspective, but also make it much more easy to integrate with the third-party systems without the heavy lift of data transformation that we're seeing sort of within the industry today. I think the agentic change really is sort of like the next generation of microservices, if you will, breaking down very monolithic processes that are smaller and more nimble, and then allowing us to redesign the applications workflow where we can use best of breed across multiple providers to figure out how to work most effectively.
That's interesting. I think so. You define the future that how the agentic AI will enable and empower the industry and the use cases. And I think so. This is a very fascinating discussion with you, John. Thank you so much for your time and the thoughts. At Zenov also, we believe that Gen AI is not only a technology, but it's a catalyst. It's an enabler for the different industry and the use cases. And we do see the return on the investments coming in different angles, for sure.
Sure. But it forces you to rethink your business workflows and the impact of technology on that. And that always brings insight into how you can kind of approach your business differently.
It is. And then the technology is moving so fast. So definitely the impact is also moving very fast and at a larger pace also.
What we're seeing from like an AI adoption from a enterprise commercial perspective is dramatically different than the experience that we're seeing from a retail, like personal perspective, right? The way we think about from a corporate perspective, transforming our business, we know our business processes, but like at the end of the day, most of our customers are going to be accessing us through some sort of chatbot, like a ChatGPT or Perplexity. What that means for the business, I think actually is super interesting, and I don't know where it's going to go, but it's one where I think at the end of the day, we're all going to be beholden to how that transformation changes on the retail side, especially on the agentic commerce side. Like the Visa and MasterCard guys would probably be like chomping at the bit to talk about that.
I think so. We'll do a quick rapid fire with you, John.
Okay.
And how has AI transformed you as a person?
Oh, that's interesting. I probably have not been transformed as a person yet. I'm still that person who probably actually still clicks through to the links to get the source data. But I can tell you that it's changed the way I do my business today. So much of what we do is data-driven. And one of the functions my team has is looking across the needs of our financial services customers from a product perspective and taking all that input and making recommendations to our service teams about where we think we can serve financial services customers. 18 months ago, I have a really smart person who knows the industry, and we used to use sort of our largest customers as sort of proxy for everything that's going on in the industry. We don't have to do that anymore, right? We can literally ask kind of our Salesforce system, hey, across all our financial services customers, what are the biggest pain points? Like, what are the biggest revenue opportunities? And while it doesn't get it all correct, it brings us insights that we wouldn't have had before because there was just no way to look through thousands and thousands of requests. The same thing that our customers are experiencing from a user experience side when they look at like, why are my customers calling me from a call center perspective? The other thing that's changed for me is the ability to actually generate content that's more fit for multiple audiences. AWS's customers aren't monolithic, and so it's everything from small and medium-sized businesses to startups, all the way through the largest and most complex enterprises. But financial services spans all of them, and the ability to tailor our message for both the account teams and the customers in a way that's really personalized is something that we wouldn't have found the value in customizing so many different channels. Today is relatively an easy lift for us, right? And so you're beginning to see that. And then from a strategy perspective, the ability to do kind of strategic research at scale across multiple geographies, it is amazing how easy it is to expand the world for information now to kind of drive your thinking about sort of the next best thing. So the tools are becoming part of the process for me. I don't think it's changed me yet, but we'll see.
But do you think so the human emotions can be replaced by AI?
I think the human judgment becomes even more valuable. Those things that are sort of repeated, well-known, that are a little bit more ticking the box exercises, the value of that goes away, right? And what you're really counting on people for is judgment. And I actually think that judgment becomes more important, and the tools enabling the person to make those decisions become more powerful.
Got it. Any movie, any person, or any book which has transformed you as an individual?
Oh, that's really a good question. I don't actually know if I'd put my finger on any one, right? I think the key to being successful in the world is to be relatively well-rounded. Mm-hmm. And I think it's better to have more sources of information that impact you a little than one that could have transformed you. So I can't think of a single one, but I do like everything from fiction through economics, through technology, because I'm still a nerd at heart. And bringing enough of the world into your perspective, it sort of allows you to tie that thread together to make things meaningful.
Wow. In tomorrow's world, if China is recommending you everything, what stock to buy, which movie to watch, what to eat, would you really like it?
I probably wouldn't, but I could see a new generation of consumer, certainly, right? Very much sort of the way Google transformed the way we all accessed information and therefore made decisions. That Perplexity or ChatGPT interface is going to do that for a new generation of users. What I think is going to be interesting there is the trust, right? It was actually almost the very first question you asked is like, yes. How do I balance sort of innovation with like trust? Well, the question is, how are you going to trust those portals to make those decisions for you? We talked a little bit about how we see a more agentic universe. Well, sure, there could be a portal about what's the best place for travel, what's the best hotel, but like, whose agent do you trust and do you have visibility to that? I think that's actually going to be the real challenge about consumer adoption in the future, is how do we establish trust and visibility to who's making the recommendation and why they're making it, to get people comfortable that actually getting advice in that way is something they should lean into. I think it's unfortunately inevitable, or maybe fortunately inevitable, right? The way people are consuming information is different, but that is still a big challenge for the industry to solve.
So thank you so much for your time today, John. Thank you so much. Thank you, audience, for listening to us. And we'll come back to you with the next podcast series. For now, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Zinnov Podcast. Stay tuned for more such interesting episodes. You can listen to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or any of your favorite streaming platforms.